Okay, hi. I'm Dr. Sorensen, and I am full-time faculty here in the anthropology program. And today we have a guest speaker, Dr. Susan Mazur Stommen, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about how you can use your degree in anthropology and perhaps social science, since we have some social science majors here too. How you can use that degree in kind of maybe more non-traditional ways. In other words, for those of you who are not interested in going into the academic world, which most students do not end up doing. So hopefully she can give you guys some ideas and some insight into what it takes to parlay that degree in anthropology into something, into a career. So I'm going to mute myself and let Dr. Mazur Stommen, go ahead and tell us what she does for a living.
Thanks. So yes, I am going to be talking today about practicing anthropology and what that means. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of an introduction to myself. Basically, I consider myself to be a hybrid. I'm both an academic and a practitioner. As I'll talk about today, a lot of what I do, you definitely do need to have graduate degrees to do. However, we'll talk about a couple of different sort of branching pathways and how that works. I have my own firm, Indicia Consulting. That's the logo that you're seeing. And I also still teach at Goucher College, which is a small liberal arts college here on the East Coast. And I teach primarily actually in the master's degree of environmental studies, as opposed to teaching in a straight anthropology course. My firm, I've had for 13 years. Apparently, as of today, LinkedIn did a really good job of reminding everybody that I started it 13 years ago at the end of August. And my firm does focus on qualitative research for a variety of clients. Qualitative research can include a number of things, including focus groups, ethnographies, and surveys. And we have big clients. That is not exactly what I started off to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But most of my funding comes through large grants from the state of California, the Department of Energy, large utilities like PG&E or Southern California Edison, or large corporations, generally like Bosch or folks like that. Most of what I do is focus on consumer behavior. I focus particularly on, as I said, doing these three types of qualitative research methodologies: IDIs, or in-depth interviews, surveys, and focus groups. And oftentimes on my project, we'll do at least two or more of these in a single project, which means that what we're doing is called mixed methods research. So we are kind of very strong in terms of mixed methods research. We are also doing a fair amount of what's called machine learning or big data analysis, in addition to qualitative research. So we have a lot of methodological sort of firepower behind what we do. And our focus particularly is on behavior and sustainability. We've done research in a variety of fields, including things that are not necessarily related to sustainability, but in general, if it involves something along the lines of energy, water, air pollution, food waste, anything like that, that's something that we would be interested in doing. I specify that my firm, Indicia Consulting's main purpose is actually reducing carbon and sort of fighting climate change in a variety of ways using social science and anthropological methods. We focus a lot on energy savings. A lot of the people that we do research on or with are consumers of energy. We tend to, as I mentioned, work with the Department of Energy or with large utilities. So we also tend to focus on or be asked to research emerging technologies. So things that are coming online Things that can include smart meters, apps on your phone that tell you, what appliances are using which kinds of energy when. We've done work on commercial lighting. There's a lot of really interesting stuff to do with productivity and health and the kinds of lighting you have in office spaces. We've also worked with utility programs that you may be experienced with, such as time of use or daytime, nighttime rates that get introduced, looking at how people adopt and adapt to these new rates. So we talk about that overlapping, basically, behavior and sustainability with a real strong focus on energy is what we really look at. So what kinds of things does this entail? Well, for my business, we often tackle a project sort of holistically, and we manage the process from soup to nuts. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. But basically, we don't just do the qualitative research. We often have to do it as part of a larger effort, whether it's the rollout of a new technology, like a smart meter introduction, or the rollout of a new time of use rate. So we have to play a lot of different roles. We have to be very flexible. As such, one of the things that we do is we have to gather data ethically, as I mentioned, using mixed methods. This also can mean we also do what's called primary and secondary research. So oftentimes any project that we do has a literature review component. You don't necessarily want to just start from scratch, reinventing the wheel. So you're going to have to be really comfortable doing, library or archival research. It's one of the first things that we might do. We also have to organize and process data using a variety of tools. I've already mentioned machine learning. What that means is folks on our staff have comfort levels with programming, with GIS packages, with ethnographic software like Atlas TI. So we have a familiarity with a variety of statistical packages, lots of software, in addition to just sort of traditional audio and visual recording of ethnographic data. What this also means is that we produce outputs in many different forms. We put out a lot of content. We can do peer-reviewed journal articles. We do a lot of presentations and webinars like the one that we're doing right now for you guys. We also do social media, a lot of sort of social media content, blog posts. We'll do industry white papers. We'll do content that other people package for sale, or depending on the group, if it's a nonprofit, sometimes in a larger edited volume. So we have to be comfortable writing in a variety of styles and producing a lot of different types of content. We also have to be aware and comfortable distributing our content across many different platforms. So we have a website. We participate in social media in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You have to be relatively visually fluent and taking a lot of pictures, as well as writing. Sorry. One second. Hopefully we won't have to stop here because I'm feeling my throat suddenly clamp up. Hang on. Let's see what I've got here. I usually have something for this. If not, we'll have to pause, but usually I have a spray. So we have to promote our work across a variety of media as well. And so all of these things are going to play a role in the things that I'm suggesting that students be comfortable doing with their careers. So what do I think that students of anthropology need to succeed in terms of the kind of work that we're doing? If you want to get involved in non-academic marketing or consulting, but you still want to retain the tools and skill sets you learned in your anthropology degree, you want to retain also a strong emphasis on ethnographic methods and techniques. And that means that you should feel comfortable with different types of interviewing methods and scenarios. For example, understanding the difference between an in-depth interview and an intercept. An intercept is the type of thing that you might do at Walmart or Kohl's. You know, you want to talk to somebody who's shopping for 5 or 10 minutes, have them walk you through something, versus an in-depth interview. You want to pause for a second? I'm going to go get a spray. So, as I was saying, one of the things that you want to understand is you want to feel comfortable with different methods of interviewing. In-depth interviews, which can last up to 4 hours at a time, usually taking place in somebody's home or office, or intercepts, versus sort of deep, traditional participant observation and ethnography. Oftentimes in the kind of world that I work in, you're not spending months, weeks, years in the field. You know, you're spending hours or days, maybe a week, depending. And conversely, at the same time, we often interview larger sets of people than you might get in a more traditional ethnographic fieldwork scenario. So we may interview people 25, 50, 75 households for a project. So you have to understand the difference between sort of that traditional, long-term, embedded ethnographic fieldwork and kind of corporate applied ethnography, which is shorter timeframes, oftentimes more intense. You should also practice with tools for recording. That includes audio recordings, visual recordings, but most especially field notes. One of the areas in which students, I think, oftentimes don't fully flesh out what they're doing is in the field notes. There are not any hard and fast rules about how to take field notes, but the more comprehensive, the better. So good practice with taking field notes. That includes both during your interviews and observations, but also writing them up afterwards. So prior to and immediately after an in-depth interview, we would spend probably an hour writing up, our impressions of the conversation. I also encourage folks, particularly professors teaching anthropology these days, to let students use phones, right, rather than insisting on people using video cameras or cameras, which are sort of out of date. I've had recent experience with professors who are still kind of insisting on that, and it's just really not how people are handling audio and visual recordings these days. So everybody has to get with the times. I recommend that students spend multiple times in the field, get as much field work in as you can, and be creative about how to do that. One of the things that you should do is to look for internships in for-profit or government organizations. And that may seem daunting, but I would recommend reaching out to organizations and offering services rather than expecting that things will come with the words sort of anthropological or ethnographic or even qualitative. You can sort of volunteer your services and wangle your way into organizations that oftentimes find they really benefit from having this type of qualitative research in-house. So keeping in mind as many times as you can to apply and practice your skill set is going to really come in handy later on if you want to develop a career in the field. One of the things that I think is important, particularly for any anthropologist, but for anthropologists working in sort of government or corporate arenas, is that you have intense training on ethics prior to entering the field. That is because you will not have your hands held once you are working for corporations or government entities. Most of them are not well versed in sort of subject protections and privacy. So you're going to really want to understand how to protect the data privacy of your subjects, how to protect their anonymity, sort of how to abide by some of the first principles of anthropology and anthropological research that you've probably learned about in your earliest anthropology classes. I think it's really important for students who are interested in, kind of forging their own path to have exposure to design, research design, and analysis. And this can sound intimidating, but it doesn't have to. Really, what we're saying when we say understand research design and analysis is to understand, have a suite of tools or methods, understand when to use which particular method, what it's going to get you in terms of the data, and what kinds of questions that data can answer for you. Also understand how to connect theory to method. In other words, different kinds of questions often stem from different sort of theoretical perspectives. And thus, to answer them, you need to apply a particular method to gather the data to answer that question. So understanding the ways in which theory and method are connected is important. And it doesn't mean that you have to understand all theories and all methods. It doesn't mean that you have to understand the theories and the methods that you are employing. And that also means being very conscious of your own theoretical perspectives. What this means, understanding the kinds of theories that sort of your own theoretical perspective and your own sort of methodological process informs the kinds of claims you can make and support, and the kinds of information that you can then deliver to clients, whether they are, again, government agencies or nonprofits or corporate clients. They're going to want to understand how come you can say what you can say. And the only way that you can do this is if you understand the theory and the method and how they connect. As I started talking about earlier, we use a lot of mixed methods, and understanding mixed methods, both from the purely qualitative side of things, IDIs, surveys, focus groups, intercepts, etc. Those are important, but it's also important to understand some of the quantitative aspects, particularly at a minimum, sort of basic descriptive statistics, but also preferably some reasonably, statistics like, regression and chi-square type of things. So I definitely recommend that students take some time to understand how to quantify ethnographic data that they've collected in the field. And that can come in sort of two primary ways, one of which is through coding. And coding can absolutely be done with pencil and paper. It can be done using Excel spreadsheets, but it can also be done using ethnographic software like Atlas TI or In Vivo. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Again, you don't necessarily have to know all of them, but having at least one method or understanding of how to code and why to code ethnographic data is important. Similarly, basic statistics, in order to have something to say after collecting data. And collecting data is not neutral. At a minimum, you're always asking people for their time. And so I feel like it's just respectful that if you've asked people for their time, that you collect good data and you put it to the uses that you've sought to do. So understanding why you're asking what you're asking, what those answers will give you, and what kinds of claims and connections you can make are important. One of the biggest mistakes that I often see is people just putting out what we might call descriptive statistics, which are really more outputs than conclusions. And by which I mean saying something like 97% of people answered this survey. Well, that's great, but that's really not going to tell us very much. And a lot of times people also prefer to have surveys conducted rather than ethnography, partly because people know what a survey is, and so they find it easier to get sign off. So when you're dealing with somebody who's a potential boss or client, understand that the unfamiliarity of ethnographic research means that you're going to probably have to go an extra step in terms of explaining what it is that you're doing. But oftentimes, if you know what you're doing, you can get much richer, more detailed results. than you can from a basic survey. One of the things that can sometimes maybe startle people, freak them out a little bit when they move into the non-academic practitioner world is, in addition to the pace of research, there's oftentimes a lot of sort of applications that one uses to manage the workday. And this can be particularly true if you are collaborating with people who are dispersed. For example, many of the people that I work with are all over the country. Our clients are all over the country. A lot of our work is ultimately shared over either FTP or cloud-based applications. So having a passing familiarity with a business suite of applications is going to be really important. So for example, some folks probably are already familiar with things like Google Docs or Dropbox. I see a lot of students these days using Google Docs. But many may not be familiar with things like Slack, Doodle, Trello, or Zotero, all of which are applications that we use. Slack is, sort of a real-time chat. Doodle helps people schedule meetings. Trello is project management software, and Zotero is free bibliographic management software. So just understanding that there can be a bewildering array of applications that people are going to be expected to feel very comfortable with when setting off into sort of the corporate world. Sorry, just going back. So ideally, in order to kind of proceed into this wild world of corporate applied practitioner anthropology, things that I would recommend include that ideally you would have interned in a business or government agency at some point during your undergraduate or graduate career, at a minimum, that you would have taken an applied anthropology course if it's offered. Oftentimes these are also, under medical anthropology or developmental anthropology. Even best though is if you can find the rarely offered sort of business anthropology, corporate anthropology course. I also would recommend students take a class in entrepreneurship if they're offered. And again, that's because what we're ultimately talking about is how to create what does it take to create a business where you have your own business in anthropology. And I think a lot of anthropologists by nature are somewhat entrepreneurial. Folks take off and go into unusual cultures or faraway places or even close by places, but subcultures that are not familiar to them. And so there's a lot of sort of, I would say, bravery and entrepreneurship and independence of spirit that forms the background for a lot of anthropology students. And taking that, however, and structuring that and understanding some basic things about cash flow and capital and how to run a business would be probably useful. Sorry. So that said, let's talk about some specific roadmap aspects to developing a practice in anthropology. What should you not do? After I've said all of this, do not run out and set up your own business. One of the things that students often ask is, how can I do what you do? And the answer to that is, it's not really an overnight process. I worked for 20 years probably in various capacities, including 18 I was a Sizzler waitress, and I worked in Silicon Valley. I worked throughout grad school. I taught, and then I founded my own business, and I've had my own business for 13 years. So I've done a lot of other work with other people before I even considered setting out on my own. So don't take this and say, okay, I'm going to run out, I'm going to become a practicing anthropologist. The first thing that you want to do is to just look for people who are doing the kind of work you want to do. So you want to find people who have the same, ethics or values, or who are conducting research on topics that you're interested in, and see if you can go work with them in whatever capacity. I didn't necessarily get to work as an anthropologist in Silicon Valley, but I did work in product marketing, and that's actually surprisingly close. You want to work with people and get experience while figuring out your path. And that can be, I think it's been fantastic for me and the development of my own perspective that I've worked with corporations, worked in academia, and I've worked for nonprofits. I have never worked in government, and I don't really want to, but if that's kind of what floats you, if you're interested in policy making, for example, you're going to probably want to intern or work in some type of governmental capacity, some type of agency capacity. So getting that work experience in a variety of theaters is really important. So what would I recommend doing next? And we can take a moment here before we go to the next section. We'll ask some questions, but take a few minutes. And while we're talking here, you can envision yourself 10 years from now. Write down on a piece of paper, what's your vision? What are you doing? Where are you living? Who are you living with? I mean, what is your ideal scenario? This also helps when you're thinking about making moves like taking a new job or going to grad school. You want to ask yourself some questions, sometimes that seem very mundane or pragmatic. Like, if you don't like snow, don't go to grad school in a place where it's snowy all the time. People oftentimes don't realize how much of a issue things like seasons or climate can be on achieving their goals. Similarly, if you are married or have a long-term relationship or have kids or are anticipating having kids in the near future, you're going to want to make maybe some different decisions than if you are single or newly married but don't have kids. So taking into account your own flexibility of life circumstances is really important. Where are you living? How much risk do you feel like you can take on? What is what are your needs in terms of supporting yourself, supporting any dependents? These are kinds of questions you want to ask, as well as kind of to shape, like, where do you want to end up? So before I go on to the next slide, I'll stop and see if there are any questions right now, Kathy.
If anybody has any questions, go ahead and type it into the chat. You can see the chat box down at the bottom. Looks like the little balloon. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, now's the time to go ahead and put it in the chat. Anytime during the presentation, you can put something in the chat. But
I can't see the chat, so if you could read it to me, Kathy, that would be great.
I don't have any questions in the chat right now, so.
Okay, we'll just keep going then.
Okay.
All right, so roadmap. One of the things that I recommend students do at this juncture is you take a few moments to think through a logical pathway to your goals. And again, a lot of students, I've mentored a lot of students over the years, both as a teacher and as a mentor in sort of the corporate space. And this is one of the things I ask students to do, is to take a piece of paper and sketch out your initial pathway. After you've figured out kind of where would you like to be in 10 years, ask yourself the following questions, which are, what skills do you need to add or work on? I've given you guys a lot of skills or things to think about, being comfortable with. If there's any gaps in those, then that's something that you might want to pick up. That's something that you might want to, pencil in for, a future internship or a future training course. What kinds of qualifications do you need to possess to achieve where you want to be in 10 years? That doesn't necessarily mean a PhD. You can do ethnographic or anthropological type of work, oftentimes for marketing or other research firms. Many times it could be a BA, but there may be a need for you to have an MBA. Or I have friends who have anthropological BAs and masters in public health, and they do work for, Riverside County Public Health Department. So there's a lot of pathways that this can take you where you would still have an anthropologically informed or inflected career, but depending on what you want to do and where you want to do it, then you're going to need to decide, well, are there other qualifications that I might need to get, master's degrees, professional degrees, training courses, and then what's the amount of runway that you need to get there? 10 years may seem like a long time, depending on your age, or it can start to seem really quick. And so understanding how long a process takes, a typical PhD, time to PhD for an anthropologist is around 8 years. So that's not counting necessarily any pre-work or master's degree. That's just literally from entering the department. The only longer one is actually a degree in English, strangely, and they don't even have field work. So I don't really understand why that's the way that is, but you can do it faster. I got my PhD in 5 years. However, it did help that I had worked in corporations and I had a lot of skills that I'd already accumulated that allowed me to be more efficient with my time. So for example, I had taken time management classes when I worked for corporations. I had taken courses in managing spreadsheets, for example, and I tend to use a lot of spreadsheets just to manage my own daily work. So understanding how long you need in terms of your runway, in terms of the resources that are available to you, this is all part and parcel of starting to think about your life with somewhat of an entrepreneurial or business-like eye, understanding things like, return on investment, risk to benefit ratio, things like that. The next thing that I also recommend students do, particularly students who really are interested in developing their own business, and I think that's great if you can do that and you are an entrepreneurial type of person, is to write up a provisional business plan. Put everything down on paper. There are a lot of business plan templates out there that can help you, and I strongly recommend downloading a business plan template and filling it out to the best of your ability. This can be a useful exercise for any number of kind of adventures or proposals that you may have, including going to grad school. Write down, what is it that you want to do? Why do you want to do it? For me, one of the reasons why I really wanted to have my own business was that as a traditional academic anthropologist, you do get caught up in what's called the publish or perish cycle. And that often means delving deep into the data that you've already collected, and you don't really necessarily have a lot of time for new or extended field work. And I didn't really feel like I was very practiced in my field work approach after just doing a PhD, just doing 1 year, in my field site. I felt kind of fraudulent. So I really wanted to get the opportunity to hone my skill set in terms of field work. And that has definitely been the case. I do a lot of fairly large scale projects now, and I do get to get out into the field and do, ethnography and interviews, particularly on a regular basis. Ask yourself, if I go down this path, who is going to pay me to do this kind of work? And why will they pay you to do it? There may be some ethical issues. I mean, do you want to do work for Shell, right? Oil. Do you want to do work for the prison system? Do you want to do work for a pharmaceutical company? Are there things that you think are, bright lines that you don't want to cross in terms of your own personal beliefs and values? You're going to probably want to outline those. Who's going to pay you to do this type of work? Who's your audience? I originally started my firm. I really wanted to work with small to medium-sized organizations. I felt that they were the folks who really needed anthropological insights. Particularly, I thought that there was something I could help folks with in terms of small to medium local retailers who are fighting against, both big box stores and sites like Amazon. But the problem is they just don't have the money or time typically to afford me. And that's even after making a lot of concessions. And so over time, it's not been, wasn't my intention, but I typically work with very large organizations. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I typically work with large NGOs, federal agencies, departments of, from the state of California, national labs, and large corporations. So understanding who really will be able to afford you and who will want to pay for your services is going to be important. And then work on boiling it down. Work on trying to see, what is the real gist of what you want to do. What's the synthesis of what is it you're trying to accomplish, and what your goals are. So the next thing you want to do, again, if you're really interested in following this path, is to create and structure a business. And this is going to mean forms. It's going to mean having to sign up on websites with the Secretary of State. You have to understand, what are the steps involved in creating a business. You can't just go out and announce yourself and give yourself a name and start conducting research. It's not that simple. You're going to have to decide things like, are you a for-profit or nonprofit business? Nonprofits can make money. You just can't pay dividends. So you can have a nonprofit organization. It's just a different set of steps and requirements than a for-profit business. So understanding these can sometimes be difficult, particularly if you are interested in doing some type of community-based work, for example. Knowing your audience, again, knowing who you're trying to work with and work for is going to be an important part of this process. Understanding the structure of your business. Are you working for yourself? Are you married? Do you have a partner? Do you have a business partner? Do you anticipate having a business partner? Do you anticipate hiring people? Is that something that you want to do? Do you just want to stay a sole proprietor? Answering some of these basic structural questions is going to be important. And then finally, there's sort of another like icing on the cake, which is really signing up for other things that can give you a competitive edge. That can be including making sure whether or not you are a woman-owned small business or a veteran-owned small business or a minority-owned small business. Those are all opportunities out there, both at the state and the federal level. There's also federal contracting, getting things like what are called a SAM number, SAM, or a CAGE number, which will allow you to work with the federal agencies or the Department of Defense, if that's something that you can do. Oftentimes, these very large, intimidating seeming organizations are mandated to work with small organizations, particularly, again, women-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned businesses. And you can be oftentimes partnered on a grant. You may not be the lead on the grant, but this is an area that you can find a lot of opportunity in. But it does take research, and it does take time, and it does take maintenance. You have to actually go in and oftentimes like re-sign up every year. Sometimes you have to get a notary to sign off on things. So the step after doing your business plan would be really thinking through, how do you want to structure your business? What steps do you need to take for that? And that pretty much concludes the talking portion for me. I'm showing on the screen right now. Feel free to contact us. Take a look at some of the things that are that we've put out there. We have some free downloads on our website for people who want to take a look at the kind of work that we've done. I also post about the types of topics that we research, also including methods and theories in anthropology, advances in sort of ethnographic techniques on Twitter and on Facebook. So feel free to follow us there. And with that, I will conclude and see if there are any follow-up questions.
We don't have any questions in the chat right now, but I did have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned some of the jobs that you had before you got into, started your own consulting firm. What got you into anthropology? I mean, did you have non-anthropological bachelor's, for example, and then kind of gravitated towards a PhD, or did you do the bachelor's in anthropology? Yeah.
I have all of my degrees in anthropology. I think I even have an AA in anthropology. I have an AA, a BA, a master's, and a PhD, and I think all in cultural. What got me interested? I think the first thing that got me interested was I was taking courses in filmmaking at San Francisco State, and I ran across an anthropologist who was saying, "Oh, you should think about becoming a visual anthropologist." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds interesting." And you know, having taken a course with her, and then I think I took one other course in anthropology, and I thought, you know, this actually suits my background, my skill set that I've already kind of developed better. And so pretty much I just decided, yeah, this is kind of my gig, and went for it.
Yeah, I think it's my background's the same. It's anthropology all the way, from bachelor's all the way through the PhD. But you know, just to ask some of the students that are here, where do you guys have, where do you see yourselves in 10 years? What kind of jobs are you interested in getting? And is there anything that that we can answer for you, or kind of, you know, talk with you about, if anybody wants to volunteer, kind of what they see themselves doing in 10 years, and how it, you know, maybe some of the stuff that that Dr. Mazur Stommen talked about today. Do you think that's going to be helpful for you? You know, what do you think? And of course, if you want to reach out to either one of us with questions and ask for some advice, you know, happy to do that. All right, well, I guess we have no questions today. So I guess we can end the recording. And like I said, reach out if you do. I know sometimes, you know, hours later we'll think about the question that you should have asked. So you have her contact information.
I will say this though, Kathy. I recommend that students ask those questions in the common forum, because oftentimes, and I teach online myself, students are very worried about how they seem to other students. And so they want to ask a question in a private channel.
Yeah.
But in fact, I really encourage students to ask it in the common channels, because everybody's wondering the same things.
It's true.
And everybody really needs to get the benefit of the answers and have a dialogue about it. So again, I'm happy to answer, you know, pertinent questions, but definitely would recommend using the common forum of the course so that everybody can share in the benefit of the information delivered.
Totally agree. If you have the same question, if you have the question, the odds are that there's going to be a lot of other people with the exact same question who are too afraid to ask.
Yep.
I've been there too, where I didn't want to ask a stupid question, and regretted not asking what I thought was a stupid question when I found out that other people had the same question as I did. So yeah, so if anybody does have anything, now's the time.
So before we go, Kathy, let me ask you, what are questions that you've heard from students that prompted doing this video, for example?
I have a lot of students who ask me, and Emma, you can jump in too if you want to. I have a lot of students who tell me, I just have no idea what to do with my degree. Like, I find anthropology fascinating, but I can't figure out, you know, how you can actually make a living at it. Now, I'm an archaeologist by specialty, so a lot of the students that have that question are asking me about the archaeological career path, and I'm able to kind of give them some guidance there. But I do get a lot of students who say, you know, I have no idea. You know, I don't even know how to put it on a resume or a CV, what my skills are. And, you know, so just talking about that kind of thing, like we actually have webinars about that. But, you know, what are the skills that you learn as you go through your anthropology career? But a lot of them are just confused as to how to use it in the real world outside of academia. And they just don't, you know.
I think so my experience has been a lot of students don't understand that when they first leave as a BA, nobody really cares. Like, just get a job. Like, just get a job, right? Nobody's going to check your GPA. Doesn't happen. You know, they just want you to be a warm body with a BA, and they're going to throw you, you know, your cannon fodder. So you're going to have to go through that experience. You don't have to spend a lot of time like really coming up with an elevator speech necessarily. As long as you can demonstrate soft skills like showing up on time and being completely dressed, somebody will hire you. You know, like really, that's just the way it is. A few years into it, you know, some of the things that you can start to do is say things like, understand that, you know, you've been exposed to a lot of different cultures. You've had like a lot of different, you know, thoughts about, you know, diversity, but also, you know, different perspectives. You've had oftentimes exposure to just simply talking to people. Many people find it very frightening to talk to people. That's always the first step if you're developing a new product or a new process for a corporation, for example, or for an agency, is just going out and talking to the people who might be affected. And having had even minimal exposure to the kinds of interviewing techniques that we talked about today can really help people, you know, design new products and processes and shortcut some of the stumbling blocks that oftentimes happen when people are planning new policies, new products, new processes in a vacuum, right? Without talking to their constituents, their customers, their patrons. So just that is probably the key skill I would say that anthropology degrees can really help people with, is that comfort level in drawing stakeholders in. I mean, stakeholder engagement is a huge term in almost anything that you see these days, particularly in the public sphere. Whenever there's a new freeway that's going through, or a new community center, or a time of use rate, or whatever somebody's planning to put out there to the public, stakeholder engagement is really important. And stakeholder engagement is something that, you know, anthropology BAs have already some training in. So that's one of the first things I would say is, you know, be a warm body, be cannon fodder, but after you've gotten your feet wet, you know, start to promote yourself as somebody who has these, you know, backgrounds and, you know, kind of, you know, open-minded, you know, flexible approach, comfort, talking to people, familiarity with stakeholder engagement.
Excellent advice. It really is. And I hope everybody that watches this presentation takes that into serious consideration, because it really is. I can't think of almost any job that you wouldn't be able to use some of those skills. And, you know, just even in retail, dealing with customers, you know, if you want to work your way up in management in retail, being able to talk to and understand the needs of your customers is really important. So, I mean, these are skills that I think you can apply to just about any career path that you choose. So I think that's excellent advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything that requires systematic observation, right? Some type of methodological data collection around human behavior, which is almost, like you said, retail, hospitality, you know, law, marketing, you know, customer service. There's just a ton of stuff where you can apply these skill sets.
Anybody have anything else to add? Any questions? Anything? All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Mazur Stommen, for sharing your time with us and giving such an excellent presentation and sharing a lot of really good advice. I hope that I can actually take some of this and use this to advise some of my students when they come to me. So I learned a little bit today myself. And I think it's helpful to lay it out in the way that you did, and actually the steps. I think that some of the putting the stuff pen on paper is really, I think is good advice. And I think I'll start urging my students to do that too. So thank you very much. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you very much.